Okay, so let's try to picture something here. Imagine trying to freeze a small grape versus trying to freeze this really large, just overfilled water balloon.
Right, two very different physical objects.
Exactly. I mean, if you put a small grape in the freezer, it loses temperature relatively evenly,
Yeah, the mass is small.
Right, so it cools down, it solidifies, and its skin generally just stays completely intact.
Mhm.
But that water balloon, well, it behaves entirely differently. As this massive volume of water inside drops below freezing, it actually begins to expand.
Right, the physics of water.
Yeah. And as it expands, it stretches, and eventually the sheer physical force of that expanding ice just tears its own skin apart.
It bursts.
It bursts.
Yeah.
And the human egg, the oocyte, is basically that water balloon.
It is, yeah. That's a really accurate way to look at it.
And, if you are joining us for this deep dive today, you might be a professional who is currently standardizing protocols in your own clinic.
Or maybe a nurse handling an urgent oncology case.
Right.
Staring down a ticking clock.
Yeah, exactly. Or perhaps you're a patient and you're listening closely because you are actually taking steps to safeguard your own future and reproductive potential.
Which is such a massive undertaking.
It really is. And whoever you are in the exact right place. Because today, we are exploring what might honestly be the ultimate biophysical challenge in all of reproductive medicine.
Right. We are talking about pausing biological time.
Yes, pause and take.
And just to set the stage here, we are stepping away from the immediate fertilization workflows that we've covered in previous discussions.
Right, no embryos today.
Exactly. We aren't talking about creating an embryo today at all. We're focusing entirely on preserving the unfertilized human oocyte.
Which historically was incredibly difficult.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, for decades, the ability to freeze sperm and freeze embryos was a really reliable, well-understood science.
Yeah, clinics have been doing that forever.
Right. But yeah. And to understand why, we kind of have to frame modern vitrification not just as a minor tweak to routine IVF.
It's not just a setting on a freezer.
No, it's completely distinct, mathematically exact cryobiological science. I mean, we are actively manipulating the physical state of matter here.
Wow.
Yeah, we're basically fighting the fundamental laws of thermodynamics to protect the single cell from its own internal environment.
And to really understand how we fight those laws of physics, we have to start with the physical reality of the cell itself, right?
We do.
Because the oocyte actively resists being frozen. I mean, the water balloon analogy gives us a visual, but the actual mechanics of why water is so dangerous here requires a closer look at the biology.
Well, the human oocyte is the largest single cell in the entire human body.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. I mean, it is actually visible to the naked eye as a tiny speck.
Really? Just without a microscope?
Yeah, just a tiny speck, which is staggering when you consider that most somatic cells require high-powered microscopy just to even be identified.
Right.
And because of this massive volume, it contains an enormous amount of fluid, predominantly water, compared to its relatively small surface area.
So it's mostly just a giant sack of water.
Basically, yes. And when high water content environments drop below the freezing point, the water molecules lose kinetic energy.
Okay.
Instead of moving freely, they begin to bond together via hydrogen bonds, and they organize into a rigid, expanding hexagonal lattice.
Which, in normal terms, means ice.
Exactly. The physical manifestation of that lattice is sharp, jagged ice crystals.
Right.
And if those crystals form inside the oocyte, they act like microscopic knives.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they indiscriminately slice through the delicate lipid bilayers of the internal organelle membranes. They just completely shred the internal architecture of the cell.
So it's literally mechanical destruction. It's not a matter of the cell simply, getting too cold and its metabolic engine just quietly shutting off.
No, not at all.
The ice literally tears the structural integrity of the cell to pieces from the inside out.
It is irreversible structural annihilation.
That is terrifying for a single cell.
It really is. But the volumetric water hazard is actually only the first major hurdle here.
Wait, there's more.
Oh, yeah. The second hurdle involves the unique biological state of the oocyte at the exact moment we need to preserve it.
Okay, tell me about that.
So this requires us to look very closely at the architecture of the DNA. When an egg is developing inside the follicle in the ovary, it progresses through these very distinct maturation stages.
Right, they kind of grow up, essentially.
Exactly. And we track these developmental stages under the microscope. When it is immature, we often refer to it as being in the M1 stage.
Okay, M1.
Right. But the ultimate goal, the optimal state required for both successful fertilization and for freezing, is the fully mature stage. We call this the M2 stage.
M2. Got it.
So when we collect the oocyte during a retrieval and bring it into the laboratory, we are actively searching for that specific M2 maturity.
Right, because the M2 stage is basically the holy grail for a cycle. But from what I understand, it brings this massive structural vulnerability when it comes to temperature.
It really does.
Because we are dealing with a cell that is actively paused right in the middle of a highly complex developmental sequence.
Exactly. At the M2 stage, the maternal chromosomes are incredibly exposed.
Oh, really?
Yeah. In most standard human cells, and even in an immature M1 egg, the DNA is safely locked inside a tough, protective double membrane structure called the nucleus.
Right. The nucleus is like the vault.
It's the vault, heavily shielded from the surrounding cytoplasm, but in an M2 oocyte, that nuclear envelope has completely broken down.
Wait, so the vault is just gone?
It's gone. The chromosomes are just out in the open. They are precisely aligned along this highly fragile, microscopic web of microtubules.
Okay.
And this entire intricate web-like structure is called the meiotic spindle.
So picture like a microscopic suspension bridge made of spun glass, right? With the chromosomes balanced delicately right in the center of it, under immense tension.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. The spindle is this highly dynamic, living structure made of polymerizing tubulin proteins.
Wow.
It is constantly building and breaking down at its ends, holding those chromosomes in perfect tension so that when fertilization finally occurs, the genetics can split exactly in half to pair with the incoming sperm.
Right, so it's doing a lot of active mechanical work.
A ton of work. The problem is that this spindle apparatus is exquisitely sensitive to thermal shock.
Yeah.
If an M2 oocyte is exposed to even a brief drop in temperature, I mean, even just dropping from body temperature down to ambient room temperature for a matter of minutes, the thermodynamics completely shift.
The room temperature alone can do it.
Just room temperature. The energy required to keep those tubulin proteins polymerized just falls away.
Yeah.
The microtubules undergo catastrophic depolymerization.
Which means?
The spindle fibers literally dissolve into the cytoplasm.
Oh, man. And when that suspension bridge dissolves, the chromosomes that were held so perfectly in the center just scatter randomly throughout the cell.
Exactly.
Because there's no tether holding them in place anymore.
Right. And once they scatter, the spatial genetic alignment is permanently lost.
You can't just put them back.
No. If you were to subsequently warm that egg and attempt to fertilize it, the mismatched, disorganized chromosomes would lead directly to severe aneuploidy, basically massive genetic errors.
Right.
The resulting embryo would arrest and fail to develop entirely. Because of this, the spindle's vulnerability dictates an absolute unwavering law in the embryology laboratory.
And this is the 37-degree rule, right?
The 37.0 degrees Celsius rule. Every single piece of equipment during the pre-freeze processing window must maintain this exact temperature.
Everything.
Everything. The heated stages of the microscopes, the culture dishes, the handling media, the pipettes, everything is strictly maintained at exactly 37.0 degrees Celsius. We have to keep that spindle perfectly stabilized until the exact millisecond we transition the cell into the freeze.
You know, here is where it gets really interesting, and it's a question that frequently comes up when looking at the history of IVF.
Yeah.
If embryos freeze so easily, and, clinics have been successfully freezing embryos for decades, why doesn't this spindle issue affect them?
That's a great question.
Right. I mean, embryos are full of DNA. They have to divide and multiply. Why did the egg hold out for so long while the embryo was easily preserved?
The difference lies entirely in the timeline of cellular development.
Okay.
When we freeze a day 5 or day 6 embryo, fertilization has already occurred. The maternal and paternal genetics have successfully combined. The single cell has divided into hundreds of cells.
Right, it's a whole cluster.
Exactly. And most importantly, the DNA within each of those individual cells has reorganized and locked itself back safely inside newly formed, tough nuclear envelopes.
A vault is back.
The vault is back. The meiotic spindle did its job during cell division and then disassemble naturally. An embryo's genetics are enclosed, protected, and incredibly stable.
Okay, that makes so much sense.
But the unfertilized M2 oocyte is caught in this state of suspended animation. Its spindle is fully deployed, completely exposed, just waiting for a sperm that hasn't arrived yet. It is basically structurally naked.
Wow. So we have a cell that is essentially a giant water balloon, highly prone to forming internal molecular ice knives that will shred its membranes.
Yep.
And floating inside that massive volume of water is a fragile glass suspension bridge holding the DNA, a bridge that will just dissolve if it even senses the room temperature air.
That is the situation, yes.
Well, before we look at how the laboratory manages to cheat these laws of physics, we need to understand the stakes. Because the oocyte doesn't just arrive on the lab bench by accident,
No, there's always a patient on the other side.
Exactly. The context of the patient dictates the entire workflow, the timeline, and the pressure within the laboratory.
That's so true. In the lab, we are generally managing two distinct clinical pathways to preservation.
Okay.
The biological science, the actual vitrification physics, that remains identical across the board. But the patient's reality, the clinical timeline, and the administrative pressure are entirely different depending on whether we are dealing with medical onco-fertility or elective social freezing.
Let's start with medical onco-fertility.
So medical onco-fertility preservation occurs when a patient is facing an unexpected, devastating diagnosis, most frequently cancer.
Right.
And they require immediate gonadotoxic treatments. These are heavy systemic chemotherapy regimens or highly targeted pelvic radiation.
Which are brutal on the body.
They are life-saving, but they are indiscriminately destructive to rapidly dividing cells, which means they will often permanently obliterate a patient's natural ovarian reserve.
Right. So a patient receives a cancer diagnosis. They are told they need chemotherapy to survive. But that very chemotherapy will likely strip away their ability to have biological children.
Exactly.
And so the fertility clinic is basically brought in to run a parallel race against the oncology schedule.
It is an absolute race. The laboratory must operate on a fiercely accelerated timeline. In a routine IVF cycle, a physician has weeks or maybe months to optimize the patient's cycle, adjust hormone protocols, and pick the mathematically perfect day for the retrieval.
They have time to plan.
Right. In medical onco-fertility, there's often zero scheduling flexibility. We are coordinating directly with surgical oncologists and hematologists.
Wow.
We might be squeezing an egg retrieval into a tiny window, sometimes mere days before the first round of chemotherapy infusions begins.
That is so much pressure.
It is. Every single oocyte recovered in an onco-fertility case represents an irreplaceable piece of that patient's biological future. There is no opportunity to simply, try another cycle next month if the retrieval yields a low number of eggs.
Right, because the chemo starts.
This is their single closing window. And furthermore, these vitrified eggs might remain in our storage vaults for 5, 10, or 15 years, while the patient undergoes years of cancer treatment and subsequent remission monitoring.
Which means a lot of coordination later on.
It requires flawless, long-term administrative tracking and communication with oncology teams before those assets are ever cleared for future reproductive use.
Right, so contrasting that really intense emergency timeline is the other pathway, right? Elective or social fertility preservation.
Exactly.
This is a much more proactive, managed approach to reproductive autonomy.
It really is. Elective preservation involves patients making a deliberate, calculated decision to manage the natural biological reality of age-related fertility decline.
Because things naturally slow down.
Yes. As a woman ages, the chromosomal competence of her oocytes naturally decreases, and the total numerical ovarian reserve diminishes.
Yep.
So by choosing to freeze eggs at age 28 or 32 or 35, the patient is effectively locking in the biological quality and chromosomal integrity of that specific chronological age.
That's a huge shift in how we think about family planning.
It's massive. They are decoupling their reproductive potential from their chronological timeline, granting themselves massive reproductive flexibility for later in life.
And, whether the patient is an emergency oncology case or a proactive social freezer, the moment those recovered eggs enter the laboratory, the embryologist faces the exact same daunting physics problem.
Exact same one.
Because we know that slow cold drops will shatter the spindle, and we know that ice crystals will shred the cell. So how do we cross the freezing threshold safely?
We cheat physics.
Right. We have to basically bypass the physical phase of water turning into ice entirely. We abandon traditional freezing and utilize vitrification.
Precisely. See, in the early days of reproductive medicine, the standard protocol was slow freezing.
Okay, how did that work?
Well, we would place the cells in a computerized, programmable machine that would drop the temperature by fractions of a degree over several hours.
Oh, very slowly.
Very slowly. The underlying theory was that a slow, highly controlled descent would be gentle on the cells.
Makes intuitive sense.
It does, but the thermodynamic reality was that slow freezing inevitably allowed extracellular ice to form.
Ah, the ice knives.
Exactly. As ice formed in the surrounding solution, it created a massive mechanical stress. It essentially crushed the cell. And even with attempts at slow dehydration, microcrystals of ice almost always formed internally.
Right.
Now, for an embryo, which has much smaller individual cells and far less total water volume, it could occasionally survive this crushing stress. But for the massive water-filled oocyte, the slow freeze was highly lethal.
Wow.
Time is the absolute enemy of the freezing process. If water molecules have time, they will organize into a rigid crystalline lattice.
So vitrification is designed to literally remove time from the equation. It relies on ultra-high cooling velocities. I mean, we are talking about dropping the temperature of the cell at speeds exceeding negative 20,000 degrees Celsius per minute.
It's incredibly fast.
That is a thermal drop. So incredibly fast, the human mind can barely even conceptualize it.
It is functionally instantaneous. Because the thermal drop is so severe and immediate, the liquid inside the cell is frozen in motion.
Wait, frozen motion?
Yeah. The water molecules never have the time or the kinetic freedom to organize into that destructive crystalline ice phase.
Oh, I see.
Their kinetic energy is completely stripped away before they can align into a lattice. They simply stop moving entirely.
Wow.
And the structural result is what we call an amorphous glass state. The internal environment of the cell becomes a solid, completely clear, non-crystalline glass. The structural integrity of the delicate membranes and the spindle remains perfect.
But you cannot achieve vitrification just by dropping the temperature quickly, right?
No, unfortunately not.
Like, if an embryologist took a completely untreated oocyte fresh from the incubator and plunged it into liquid nitrogen, even at negative 20,000 degrees a minute, the sheer volume of water would still form ice and shatter the cell.
Exactly. The water volume is just too high.
Right. So to achieve the amorphous glass state, the embryologist has to fundamentally alter the internal chemistry of the cell before the freeze. We have to severely dehydrate the matrix.
This is where the chemical exposure protocol comes in. The embryologist takes direct, manual control of the cell's internal environment using a highly precise two-step chemical sequence.
Okay, step one.
We utilize specialized solutions called cryoprotectants, which operate essentially as highly engineered biological antifreeze. The first step in this sequence utilizes a solution called the equilibration medium, or EM.
So let's visualize this on the lab bench for you listening. You have the oocyte under the microscope, resting at a perfectly maintained 37.0 degrees.
Yep, the heated stage.
The embryologist introduces it to the equilibration medium. What are the physical and chemical forces at play the moment that cell touches the EM?
The moment the oocyte enters the equilibration medium, this intense osmotic tug-of-war begins.
Osmotic tug-of-war.
Right. The EM contains a moderate concentration of permeating cryoprotectants, typically small organic molecules like ethylene glycol and dimethyl sulfoxide, or DMSO.
Okay.
Because the concentration of these solutes is suddenly much higher in the fluid outside the cell than in the fluid inside the cell, the fundamental laws of osmosis dictate that water must move to balance the concentration gradient.
Because nature wants balance.
Exactly. Water molecules are small and they move incredibly fast across the cell membrane through channels called aquaporins. So water rapidly evacuates the cytoplasm, just rushing out into the surrounding medium.
And if you were looking through the eyepieces of the microscope, you witnessed this massive physical transformation, right?
It's quite a sight.
This perfectly round, structurally taut cell suddenly collapses. It flattens and shrinks. The outer membrane actually buckles inward, and it ends up looking exactly like a deflated balloon.
It really does.
To someone unfamiliar with the physics of cryobiology, it probably looks like the cell has just been destroyed.
Oh, it is a visually alarming process.
Yeah.
And it requires profound trust in the physics. But this rapid shrinking is precisely what is required. We are forcefully evacuating the dangerous water volume.
Right, getting the hazard out.
Exactly. Now, as that water rushes out, those permeating cryoprotectants, the ethylene glycol and DMSO, begin to slowly cross the membrane and enter the cell.
Okay, so they trade places.
Sort of. Because they are much heavier, more complex molecules than water, they move much slower. As they steadily accumulate inside the cytoplasm, they draw a small amount of fluid back in with them.
Ah, I see.
So over the course of approximately 10 to 15 minutes in the EM, you watch the cell slowly re-expand. It will not return to its full original bloated volume, but it recovers its round, spherical structure. At the end of step 1, the cytoplasm is heavily dehydrated and saturated with a moderate protective level of antifreeze.
But the cell is not ready for the liquid nitrogen yet, right?
Not yet.
It has achieved equilibrium, but it still harbors too much internal fluid to vitrify safely without forming ice. It has to move to step 2, which is the final critical wash in the vitrification medium, or VM.
Right, the VM. And the VM is a vastly different environment. It is hyper-concentrated.
Hyperconcentrate.
Very. It contains maximum levels of those permeating cryoprotectants, but it also contains a massive concentration of non-permeating sugars, specifically sucrose.
Sugar.
Yeah, sucrose. Sucrose molecules are simply too large to cross the cell membrane. They remain entirely on the outside.
Yep.
By crowding the exterior environment with these massive sugar molecules, the VM acts as a devastatingly powerful osmotic vacuum. The moment the oocyte is placed into the VM, the osmotic pull is overwhelming. The last critical volume of remaining intracellular water is aggressively sucked out of the cell.
And because the VM is so hyperconcentrated, it is highly toxic to the cell at room temperature, isn't it?
Extremely toxic.
The embryologist is suddenly racing against a biological clock. The exposure time in the VM is measured in mere seconds, typically a strict 60 to 90 seconds maximum before the chemical toxicity causes irreversible damage to the cell's proteins.
It's a very stressful 90 seconds.
Let's ground this with a real-world analogy. It is remarkably similar to packing a massive, fragile waterbed for a move across a freezing climate.
Oh, I like this.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
If you leave it full of water and put it in a freezing truck, the water freezes, expands, and completely rips the internal baffling and outer mattress apart.
Yes.
So first, you meticulously drain the bulk of the water out so it doesn't burst. Then you pump the interior full of thick industrial antifreeze to protect the structure.
Right.
And only then, once the dangerous water is gone and the antifreeze is thoroughly distributed, can you safely expose it to deep freezing temperatures.
The waterbed analogy translates perfectly to the cellular level. We drain the hazard, we introduce the chemical protector, and we ensure the remaining volume is so dense and viscous that ice formation becomes physically impossible.
Wow.
By the end of that frantic 60 to 90 second VM wash, the oocyte is maximally dehydrated. The interior is packed with dense cryoprotectants. It is chemically primed to transition into amorphous glass.
Okay, so this brings us to the climax of the preservation process. The chemical prep is done, the clock is ticking down those final seconds, and the cell has to be physically loaded, securely identified, and plunged into the cold.
Right.
And this happens in what we call the microstraw arena.
Yes. And this step demands exceptional manual dexterity and immense focus from the embryologist.
I can imagine.
We utilize highly specialized loading devices called microstraw carriers. The actual platform where the cell rests is this microscopic, leaf-like strip of engineered plastic film attached to the end of a wand. Looking strictly through the high-power microscope eyepieces, the embryologist uses a finely pulled glass capillary pipette to gently aspirate the oocyte from the VM droplet.
So delicate.
Very. They then carefully deposit the cell directly onto the very tip of that microscopic plastic film. We typically load a maximum of 2 to 3 oocytes onto a single carrier to ensure we don't crowd the thermal space.
Now, the physical placement of the cell is delicate, but the most critical variable in this loading phase is the exact volume of fluid that goes onto the film along with the egg, right?
No, absolutely.
It has to be a truly microscopic amount. The target volume is a picoliter droplet.
A picoliter, yes.
Yeah, a picoliter. For the listener trying to picture this, it's unimaginable. A picoliter is 1/trillionth of a liter.
It's tiny.
It is a volume so small that a single shaky hand, a slight tremor in the fingers, or just a momentary lapse in focus means you draw too much fluid. If the droplet is too large, the thermal transfer physics break down entirely.
They completely break down. The physics of the thermal drop rely on minimal volume. If the fluid droplet surrounding the egg on that film is too large, it basically acts as a thermal insulating blanket.
Which is the opposite of what we want.
Exactly. When the embryologist plunges the carrier into the liquid nitrogen, a large droplet will cool down far too slowly. The inner core of that droplet will miss the ultra-rapid velocity required for the amorphous glass transition.
And then what happens?
Ice will have just enough milliseconds to organize, and the cell will shatter.
Wow.
The droplet must be aggressively minimized so that the thermal drop is instantaneous across the entire volume of the fluid and the cell simultaneously.
Okay, so once the cells are perfectly positioned in that minimal picoliter volume, the final plunge happens.
Yeah,
And the methodology behind this plunge differs across the industry, right?
it does, yeah.
Laboratories actually have to choose between utilizing open systems or closed systems.
Right, and this is a major operational and philosophical distinction in the field of cryobiology.
How so?
Well, in an open system, the microscopic film carrying the oocyte is plunged directly, just bare and completely exposed, right into the pool of liquid nitrogen.
Oh, wow. Just right in there.
Yep. This methodology provides the absolute fastest possible cooling rate. Because there is direct, unimpeded physical contact between the liquid nitrogen and the microscopic sample droplet, the heat transfer is violently fast.
So the glass transition is perfect.
The amorphous glass transition is immediate and thermodynamically flawless.
But direct contact introduces a theoretical biological risk, doesn't it? Because liquid nitrogen is an incredibly harsh environment, but it is not inherently sterile.
That's the catch. Liquid nitrogen can, theoretically, harbor dormant viral or bacterial particles that survive the extreme cold.
Okay.
While the documented risk of cross-contamination, a pathogen migrating through liquid nitrogen from one patient's sample to another, is exceptionally rare, it is biologically possible.
And labs don't like risk.
No. Because embryology laboratories are profoundly risk-averse, many prefer to utilize closed systems.
How does that work?
In a closed system, the microstraws are loaded, and then the delicate tip is carefully inserted and sealed inside an airtight, sterile secondary sleeve or outer protective straw before it is ever plunged into the nitrogen.
Oh, I see.
The cell never touches the cryogenic fluid directly.
So it guarantees total biological isolation and sterility. The trade-off, of course, is that the physical barrier of that secondary sleeve slightly slows down the speed of the thermal drop, right?
It does. It introduces a minor thermal buffer. However, the engineering of modern closed system carriers has advanced significantly.
Okay.
The plastics and materials used are highly thermally conductive, ensuring that even with the protective sleeve, the internal cooling velocity remains well above the extreme negative threshold required to achieve and maintain the amorphous glass state.
Okay, we have to pause here and look at the physical carrier itself, because this tiny piece of plastic might sit submerged in a tank for 20 years.
It very well might.
How does a laboratory guarantee that when a patient returns 2 decades later, that they pull the exact right straw? You can't rely on paper labels or standard ink in an environment that extreme.
Definitely not.
I mean, at negative 196 degrees, ink smudges, paper turns to brittle dust, and standard industrial adhesives completely fail. Asset traceability has to be an obsession in the lab.
It is the absolute foundation of our ethical mandate. Asset identification relies on advanced material engineering. The microstraws utilize laser-etched, chemical-resistant barcodes and distinct alphanumeric identifiers that are physically carved directly into the high-density plastic of the carrier handle.
Physically carved.
Yes. These etched codes are immune to chemical degradation and can survive decades of complete submersion in liquid nitrogen without fading or distorting.
That's incredible.
Furthermore, these physical codes link back directly to the strict dual verification electronic tracking protocols we employ in the lab. Before a single cell is ever loaded onto a straw, those laser-etched codes are digitally scanned and permanently linked to the patient's master electronic medical record. There's a flawless chain of custody before the freeze even begins.
Right. So the chemical prep is done, the droplet volume is minimized, the barcode is logged, and the straw is flash frozen. The water has become glass.
The deed is done.
Where does it go now? Because the actual preservation doesn't happen on the lab bench. It happens inside the liquid nitrogen vaults. We need to walk out of the bright lights of the main embryology lab and step into the cryo storage room.
Right. The cryo storage vault is the silent, beating heart of any fertility preservation program. It is an entirely distinct environment.
Describe it for us.
When you enter a high-capacity cryo room, you are surrounded by massive, heavy, stainless steel tanks. In the industry, we refer to them as dewars.
Dewars, okay.
These are not simple storage buckets. They are profound pieces of thermodynamic engineering designed to entirely isolate the extreme cold from the ambient heat of the outside world.
Because a dewar is essentially a tank suspended within another tank, right?
Right.
Separated by a high vacuum space.
Exactly.
This vacuum insulation is the critical defense mechanism. Because a vacuum lacks molecules to transfer kinetic energy, it dramatically halts the transfer of ambient room heat via conduction and convection.
Spot on.
Inside the inner chamber of these dewars, the environment is intensely hostile to organic life, but it is the perfect sanctuary for cellular preservation. The liquid phase of the nitrogen pooling at the bottom of the tank maintains a permanent, unwavering temperature of negative 196 degrees Celsius.
Which is negative 196 degrees Celsius is a thermal reality that is difficult to truly grasp.
Yeah, that's cold.
Very cold. But interestingly, laboratories do not always store the precious assets directly in the liquid pool itself.
Wait, really?
Yeah. Many modern high-security facilities utilize vapor phase storage.
Vapor phase.
Right. Instead of submerging the microstraws completely in the liquid nitrogen, the intricate inventory racks are suspended just above the liquid line. They rest in the dense, swirling, freezing vapor that continuously boils off the surface of the liquid pool below.
But if the liquid at the bottom is the absolute coldest point, why elevate the assets into the vapor? It seems counterintuitive to move them away from the maximum cold.
It does seem that way, but the decision to use vapor phase storage directly targets the cross-contamination risk we discussed regarding open systems.
Oh, the fluid migration thing.
Exactly. If thousands of straws are fully submerged together in a shared pool of liquid nitrogen, that shared fluid acts as a potential highway. There is an infinitesimally small but non-zero chance that a microscopic contaminant could migrate through the fluid from one sample to another.
Got it.
By elevating the assets into the vapor phase, the laboratory completely eliminates the fluid migration pathway. The straws are surrounded entirely by dry, freezing gas.
But the critical question is whether the vapor maintains a cold enough thermal envelope to actually keep the cells in that glass state.
Oh, absolutely. The thermodynamics of the vapor phase are incredibly stable.
Yeah.
The dense vapor hovering just above the liquid line maintains a deeply protective thermal envelope, resting roughly between negative 150 degrees Celsius and negative 185 degrees Celsius.
So still well below what's needed.
Far below. The critical glass transition threshold, the temperature where the amorphous glass might begin to soften back into a liquid, is well above these temperatures. The oocytes remain perfectly, indefinitely stable, suspended in the vapor.
But managing a room full of boiling cryogenic gas requires absolute, unblinking vigilance, right?
That's a huge responsibility.
Because if a dewar fails, a clinic doesn't just lose expensive equipment, they lose entire families. They lose the features of oncology patients who have no backup plan.
Yes.
So the security guarding these vaults has to be intense. It involves 24/7 telemetry and cascading electronic alarm systems.
The security infrastructure surrounding cryovaults basically borders on obsessive, and rightly so.
How does it work?
Every single storage dewar is equipped with continuous, highly sensitive thermocouple sensor wires running down through the neck of the tank deep into the storage chamber.
Oh.
These sensors are reading the internal thermal environment constantly, parsing the temperature second by second, and relaying that massive stream of real-time telemetry to an independent, secure, off-site cloud server.
So it's not just a localized alarm buzzer on the wall.
Yeah.
The tank is actively broadcasting its exact thermodynamic status to the cloud constantly.
Constantly. And in addition to the thermal sensors, the dewars sit on highly calibrated electronic weight platforms, and they are equipped with internal liquid-level floats.
Weight platforms. Why wait?
Well, if a dewar begins to lose its liquid nitrogen even fractionally faster than its normal evaporation rate, say if a microscopic fracture compromises the vacuum seal and ambient heat begins to slowly seep in, the tank physically gets lighter as the nitrogen boils off faster.
Oh, wow. That's clever.
Yeah. The weight sensor detects this minute mass change instantly. If any of these parameters shift, if the temperature rises by a single decimal point or the weight drops unexpectedly, the system triggers an immediate, automated, cascading alarm chain.
A cascading alarm.
Yes. The cloud server instantly dials the on-call embryologist's cell phone, capable of waking them up at 2 a.m. on a Sunday.
Yikes.
If that primary responder does not acknowledge the alarm within minutes, The system dials the next embryologist, then the lab director, and it will continue escalating the alerts until a human being is physically en route to the laboratory to intervene.
That is serious.
We treat a fractional degree of temperature shift as an absolute critical emergency. We do not wait for a tank to fail. We act the moment it deviates from its established baseline.
That level of extreme long-term security brings up a fundamental question. It's a concept that many patients struggle with when they look at a storage bill year after year.
I get asked this all the time.
Does the egg actually go bad after a decade in there?
No.
I mean, is an oocyte that you thaw after a month somehow fresher, structurally stronger, or biologically superior to one that you pull out of the vapor after 15 years?
That is one of the most persistent and completely understandable myths in the entire field of reproductive medicine, and we really need to dismantle it with pure physics.
Okay, dismantle it.
At negative 196 degrees in the liquid, or negative 180 degrees in the vapor, molecular kinetic energy is virtually zero.
So nothing moves.
Nothing moves. All metabolic activity within the cell stops. Every chemical reaction, every mechanism of cellular decay, every biological process of aging, enzymatic breakdown, or structural fatigue is completely, utterly halted. There is no biological clock ticking inside a cryovault.
Biological time is completely paused. The cell doesn't know if a day has passed or a decade.
It is entirely paused. From the perspective of the oocyte, 15 minutes suspended in that vapor is biologically and thermodynamically identical to 15 years.
That is staggering.
Statistically and physiologically, an egg warmed after 20 years carries the exact same structural integrity, fertilization capability, and developmental potential as an egg warmed after 20 minutes. The extreme cold does not damage the cell. The cold holds it perfectly, flawlessly still.
A true temporal sanctuary.
Right.
But successfully putting the cell to sleep in that amorphous glass state and guarding it for decades is honestly only half the battle.
Right, because eventually they come back.
Exactly. Years later, when the patient is ready to return and attempt to build their family, the laboratory has to wake that cell up. How do we safely reverse this extreme state without shattering the glass?
Right, and here we enter the most critical and arguably the most dangerous phase of the entire cryobiological process. The warming protocol.
It's dangerous.
Oh, very. It is a common saying among senior embryologists that anyone can freeze an egg, but it takes absolute masterful precision to warm one safely.
Why is the warming process inherently more dangerous to the cell than the freezing process?
Because of the massive risk of recrystallization.
Recrystallization.
Okay. When we vitrified the oocyte, we moved it so violently fast that the water molecules couldn't form ice. But as we warmed the cell up, as the temperature rises and the solid glass matrix begins to transition back into a fluid state, those trapped water molecules suddenly regain their kinetic mobility.
Right, they start moving again.
And if the embryologist warms the cell too slowly, those water molecules will instantly find each other, organize their hydrogen bonds, and form destructive microcrystals of ice right there in the warming dish.
So the ice knives form anyway.
Yes. Even if the cell survived the freeze perfectly, a slow thaw will generate the ice knives, and the cytoplasm will be shredded on the way back up.
Wow.
To prevent this recrystallization, we must force the cell through the dangerous transitional temperature zones so rapidly that the ice still doesn't have time to form. We execute a maneuver called the thermal jump.
The thermal jump? That sounds intense.
It requires intense focus. The embryologist pulls the cryostraw from the liquid nitrogen tank, and they have to move incredibly fast. Within less than 1 single second, they plunge the microfilm holding the oocyte directly into a pre-warmed culture dish containing thawing solution, or TS.
And this thawing solution is maintained at a strict, hot 37.0 degrees Celsius, right?
Correct.
So by plunging the cell directly from negative 196 degrees straight into positive 37 degrees in less than a second, the embryologist achieves an astonishing heating velocity of over positive 50,000 degrees Celsius per minute.
Yes, positive 50,000 degrees per minute.
That kind of thermal shock just sounds violently destructive.
The thermal shock is extreme, but it is biologically necessary. It instantly flash melts the amorphous glass back into a liquid state, completely bypassing any kinetic opportunity for S to crystallize.
So the state change works.
The physical state change is successful, but the oocyte is still packed full of those dense, toxic cryoprotectants we use to dehydrate it.
Oh, right, the antifreeze.
If we just drop the cell into regular, balanced culture media right now, the massive influx of pure water trying to instantly dilute those chemicals would cause the cell to swell violently and literally burst the membrane.
So the waterbed is still full of heavy industrial antifreeze. You have to flush it out slowly to avoid popping the mattress.
Exactly. We initiate a meticulous step-down rehydration protocol. We gently move the oocyte through a series of specialized chemical droplets that contain gradually decreasing concentrations of sucrose.
Back to the sugar.
Right. The sucrose in these warming solutions acts as an external osmotic buffer. It holds the line, maintaining external pressure and allowing the dense cryoprotectants to slowly diffuse out of the cytoplasm while coaxing the natural water to step back in gently, molecule by molecule.
That is so delicate.
We are choreographing the exact reverse of the osmotic tug-of-war we performed during the freeze. We slowly step the cell down through these chemical gradients until it is finally resting in normal, balanced culture media. It regains its full, beautiful, hydrated volume. But even then, the process is not over. We do not attempt fertilization immediately.
Because of the meiotic spindle. The suspension bridge holding the DNA has just endured a massive thermal shock.
Exactly. The intense thermal shock of the warming process, going from negative 196 to positive 37 degrees, causes the fragile meiotic spindle to temporarily depolarize.
It breaks down.
The tubulin proteins fragment and the bridge partially collapses. If we were to aggressively inject a sperm into the egg right at that moment, the chromosomes would be disorganized, the genetics would not align, and the fertilization would definitively fail.
Okay, so what happens next?
The oocyte must be placed immediately into a warm, dark, tightly controlled culture incubator for a vital 2 to 4 hour incubation window.
The cell just rests in the dark.
It rests, and during those quiet hours, the cell's internal machinery powers up and goes to work. The cellular energy reserves are deployed, the tubulin proteins repolymerize, and the meiotic spindle completely rebuilds itself.
It fixes the bridge.
It reaches out, grasps these scattered chromosomes, and rigorously realigns them perfectly in the center of the cell. Only after that crucial biological rest period is complete is the oocyte structurally and genetically ready for the ICSI procedure, where a single sperm is injected to attempt fertilization.
We've walked through the immense biophysics required to make this work. We've explored the cellular water hazards, the vapor tanks, the extreme thermodynamics of the jump, but we must address the final reality check, the math of the future.
This is so important.
Because to ensure transparent ethical care, you, whether you are a patient navigating your options or a clinical coordinator counseling families, you must intimately understand the realistic statistical attrition curve that governs these frozen assets.
Managing expectations is absolutely paramount in reproductive medicine. Modern oocyte vitrification is a phenomenal scientific achievement. In a high-standard laboratory utilizing flawless technique, we expect survival rates, meaning the egg survives the thermal jump and the step-down rehydration process completely intact, to hover between a highly successful 85 to 95%.
Which is an incredible leap from the dark days of slow freezing, where survival was essentially a coin toss.
Oh, night and day difference.
85 to 95% survival is fantastic. But survival simply means the cell didn't shatter. Survival does not equal a guaranteed pregnancy.
No, survival is merely the first, albeit critical, step across the threshold. Once the eggs are successfully warmed and verified as structurally intact, they enter the standard, unforgiving IVF attrition funnel.
The funnel, right.
Those surviving eggs must undergo ICSI insemination. Only a certain percentage of them will accept the sperm and fertilize normally. Of those that do fertilize, only a portion will possess the inherent biological competence to divide, grow, and convert into a day 5 or day 6 blastocyst embryo.
The numbers get smaller at every step.
And of those blastocysts, only some will be genetically normal when tested, and only a further portion of those will successfully implant in the uterine lining and actually result in a live birth.
It is a rapidly narrowing funnel. Egg freezing is a phenomenal scientific safety net and an incredible numbers game, but it's vital to view it strictly as a statistical probability, not an absolute guarantee.
Exactly.
Having a batch of 10 to 15 frozen eggs gives you an excellent statistical probability of having a baby down the line, but it is not a physical receipt for a child.
It is a probability matrix. And the single most powerful biological factor governing that probability, the variable that dictates how many of those surviving eggs will actually make it through the funnel to become a healthy blastocyst, is age.
Age.
Specifically, the chronological age of the patient at the exact moment the eggs were frozen, not the age when they are thawed.
Right. The age at the time of freezing is the ultimate driver of downstream biological quality.
The chromosomal integrity of an egg frozen at age 30 is inherently superior to an egg frozen at age 40. The vitrification process is a flawless physical preserver. It perfectly protects whatever biological potential is present at the moment of the plunge.
But it doesn't turn back time.
It does not improve the biology. It cannot reverse the structural or energetic decline that was already present in the cells of a 40-year-old patient.
Got it.
Therefore, the stark mathematical reality is that a 30-year-old might need significantly fewer frozen eggs to achieve a live birth than a 40-year-old would. The physics of the freeze is flawlessly equal for both. The inherent biology of the starting material is what dictates the final math.
The physics is equal, the biology dictates the math. When you step back and look at the entirety of this cryobiological process, it represents the ultimate intersection of biological patience and extreme physical engineering.
It really does.
Inside those silent frosted vaults, the immense, terrifying power of biological time is simply neutralized. It loses its authority over the cell.
As embryologists, we take the responsibility of stewardship profoundly seriously. We treat every single microscopic straw locked in those liquid nitrogen tanks not just as a cellular sample, but as a vital, highly protected link to a patient's future.
It's beautiful, really.
We leverage the exact, unforgiving physics of vitrification to capture that fragile potential, ensuring that whether a patient returns in 5 years or 15 years, their biological future is waiting exactly, flawlessly, as they left it.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. It is heavy, complex science, demanding an understanding of thermodynamics, chemistry, and cellular biology. But understanding the true biophysics of fertility preservation, the fierce battle against ice, the defense of the delicate spindle, the sobering math of the thaw, it empowers you.
It truly does.
Whether you are standardizing these exact protocols in the lab or managing the profound expectations of your own life.
Whoa.
But as perfectly engineered as vitrification is, the embryology laboratory is still a place where unpredictable biology collides with human endeavor.
And sometimes things go off script.
Exactly. Sometimes, despite absolute physical precision, things do not go as planned. In our next deep dive, episode 24, Troubleshooting in the IVF Lab, we are going to change our operational mindset entirely. You're going to step into the shoes of a laboratory detective.
We will explore the intense, analytical, forensic thinking required when a cycle goes unexpectedly wrong. We will look at how a laboratory investigates sudden, catastrophic failure points, such as total fertilization failures across a cohort of eggs or sudden, inexplicable blastocyst arrest on day 3.
How does the lab separate an unexpected, systemic environmental issue, like a bad media lot, a microscopic incubator fluctuation, or a volatile organic compound in the air, from an underlying hidden biological variation inherent in the sperm or the egg?
It's a huge challenge.
It is a deep dive into root cause analysis and the absolute scientific rigor required to find concrete answers in the dark.
It will be a highly analytical and essential conversation about how we learn, adapt, and improve from the unexpected.
Until then, remember the water balloon and the grape. Remember the spun glass suspension bridge holding the delicate weight of the future. The next time you look at a photograph of a single oocyte or think about the abstract concept of freezing time, you now know the extreme thermodynamic battle fought just to keep that one single cell whole. We'll see you next time.